For years, China has been one of Iran's most important lifelines. China has bought almost all of its oil exports, shielded it diplomatically, and kept ties amid international isolation. Now, with the war raging in Iran for about 1.5 months, it was China that was able to convince it to accept a ceasefire deal. As volatile as it is, in today's episode, we speak to Einar Tangen. He's the founding partner of the Center for China and the World at Macau City University. He's also a senior fellow Center for International Governance Innovation. He's a widely recognized commentator on global political and economic affairs with a focus on China's evolving role in international governance. He joined me from Beijing to discuss China's silent role in West Asia, what it did to convince Iran to cease the fire, and why it is being so coy about the entire affair. Mr. Einar Tangen, thank you so much for joining us on Hindustan Times.
Pleasure to be here.
All right. Mr. Tangen, how has Beijing's assessment been of this war so far?
A disaster. Quite frankly, no one anticipated that Donald Trump would go to these lengths, although Beijing was prepared for the 2 months prior to declaring war. They increased the amount of oil that they were buying by about 16% each month. They now have about between 1.2 and 1.4 billion barrels of oil and substantial gas reserves. But everyone have studied the numerous reports over the last 50 years, especially the last 30 years, about the Straits of Hormuz and what that means if you go into a war with Iran. So it was just one of these things where you're looking at this and you're saying there's no end game, and they are now trying to figure out how they can right the ship. They want to be the adult in the room, but they do not want to engineer any kind of U.S.-style imposed peace. It's going to have to be a consensus.
You say everyone knew about what would happen to Strait of Hormuz if someone would attack Iran. It seems like the U.S. president wasn't aware. He said so himself.
Well, he can say what he wants, but quite frankly, the CIA and the Pentagon told him that militarily this was a mistake. You'll note that 12 senior generals have been fired since then. They were the ones who told him not to do it, and he has openly questioned the CIA, and there's rumors in Washington that Tulsi Gabbard is next on the chopping block. You'll note that her number 2 in charge of counterterrorism came out and explicitly said he was against the war, recommended against it, but was overruled for political reasons, many of which surround the Epstein scandal and the problems that Trump is having domestically with the economy.
Also, Mr. Tangen, the war has had a global impact. I did a ground report on the LPG crisis in India. I've also been speaking to some residents in Sri Lanka who are witnessing crude oil shortage. Even though you say that China prepared about 2 months before the war, did you see any real impact on the streets of China because of this war?
So far, not, but that does not mean it isn't coming. China exists as a global player, imports resources. Obviously, when you have shipping issues like this, that's going to be interrupted. It also exports value-added goods, and if people aren't buying, China isn't selling. So at this point, China has been trying consistently to have peace in whatever area is around it, not only regionally, but globally, because it's good for their business, and they believe that this is the only way to have a shared future for mankind.
And speaking of that, I spoke to Professor Jeffrey Sachs just yesterday. He was of the opinion that China would be the perfect mediator, given its closeness to Iran and President Xi Jinping being someone who Trump would actually listen to. His words, not mine. What do you make of that?
Well, I think there's all due deference to Jeffrey Sachs. I agree with most things he says, but China is not interested in picking up the mantle of the U.S. The U.S. is always trying to negotiate on behalf of other powers. At this point, it's found itself in a position where obviously Iran has no trust in the U.S. because they attacked it twice under the guise of peace talks. And at this point, they have had some success in terms of their economic reprisals. Unfortunately, those reprisals are affecting the entire globe. It's fine that Iran wants to get revenge on the U.S. for killing their leaders, invading their country, and bombing their civilians. But it's not okay for the rest of the world to be suffering from all the things you were talking about, gas and oil shortages. These are going to affect not only energy, but also food. And this is going to cause civil unrest. This is something that China and all the responsible parties, including India, want to avoid. So it's up not to China, but to the entire middle powers and the smaller powers to come together. Africa, South America, India, China, Russia, Middle East, even the stands, come together and say to both sides, the United States, you have to stop these wars of aggression, this idea that you can just invade countries and put tariffs on other countries, and to Iran to say, look, if you want to trade with the world, you have to keep us in mind. And that means that you have to allow unimpeded passage through the Straits of Hormuz. It's going to take a strong statement from a collective body in order to solve this, because at this point, there's no trust between the parties themselves.
All right, since you say that, the New York Times has actually come out with a report just a couple of hours before, and it is quoting Iranian officials who have said that China was the one who was able to convince Iran to accept the ceasefire deal. What do you think of that then?
I think that's correct in the sense that China is seen as a responsible party. It has good relations, obviously, with Tehran. It's part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it's a major partner in terms of oil. China buys the most amount of oil from Iran, but it's minuscule in compared to what it buys from the rest of the GCC. So China coming into the mix is one part. But remember, this was proposed by Pakistan. China is supporting it, but it would be equally supportive if India were to do this, Russia, Mercosur, the African Union, you name it. This is something where the whole world, as I keep saying, needs to come together. This old model where peace is dictated hasn't worked. If it did, we wouldn't be in this predicament. So it's a new model. If you want a world that is multipolar, there comes a certain amount of responsibility, and that responsibility is to act collectively when faced by dangers by individuals within the community.
But Mr. Tangen, there has to be some kind of leverage that China has that other countries don't. There is a reason the same NYT report actually says that it was China that pushed Pakistan to mediate between the two. So there has to be some leverage that China has with Iran, which makes it the only country that was able to convince Iran to accept this ceasefire deal.
Well, I think you're putting a little bit too much faith in the New York Times, which, as you well know, is not very complimentary towards the United States at any point. I think this could equally have come from India. India is a responsible stakeholder. It has good relations with all the parties. The U.S., not so much lately, but it is still a substantial country. It certainly could join in, put aside the differences that they have with Pakistan, put aside differences they have regionally, show itself to be a global player. This is not about taking credit or forcing anybody to do anything. The only way you're going to have a lasting peace is through a consensus where all parties agree that this is reasonable and they sign off on it. How else can you do it? If imposing peace was the way to do it, Donald Trump would have already done it. The fact is, he can't, and he's backpedaling as we speak. He concluded a deal, didn't include, he says he didn't include Lebanon. It's explicitly on the 10 conditions that Iran had put out there. And, you see this kind of going back and forth until you have a process where there's trust. You sit down and you can negotiate. And as I said, that is not one power. That is not China alone. It is China in combination with other great powers like India, Russia, etc.
All right, let me then see it from China's perspective. Last week, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met in Beijing with Pakistan's officials who came to the Chinese capital after hosting a meeting in Islamabad with officials from, I think, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt to discuss a possible resolution of the conflict, not just a ceasefire, but a permanent resolution for the war in West Asia. What do you make of this role when you see it from the perspective of Beijing?
Well, I think Pakistan has its own problems right now, not only economically, but also it is at war with Afghanistan. I don't quite understand why they are taking the lead on this. I was expecting India to do so because it's a better positioned, larger country. It's part of BRICS. It could have easily taken up the mantle. I don't know why Pakistan did it, perhaps to kind of make amends for all the problems that they're having now. Obviously, this puts them in the spotlight and makes their leaders look more powerful and worldly. But as I said, this is not about Pakistan. It's not about China. It is about the global trading system, whether you want it or you don't. If you don't want it, don't do anything. But if you think that your future is wedded to it, then you have a responsibility to act, not wait for others to act. And I fully expect that India will come aboard simply because this is a necessity. It's time to show leadership.
Why do you think India has not?
I don't know. I'm not privy to those conversations. As I said, I'm surprised. I think because Pakistan is involved, there's always trepidation about joining hands with a country that they believe is actively at war with them, as well as encouraging terrorist elements. Both sides say the same thing, but the issue is it's very difficult for them to collaborate. I'm hoping that Brazil, Russia, other countries will come into the mix. And at that point, India will reassert itself as a global peace negotiator, somebody who is ideally positioned to help this peace process along because of the relationships they have with all parties.
You're basically naming the BRICS grouping. You have faith that the grouping can actually bring some permanent resolution in West Asia?
It's not the BRICS acting as BRICS. I'm talking about the members of BRICS, which are substantial players, middle powers located throughout the world. This includes members of the GCC, but this is not an exclusive situation where you're depending on one grouping, one country. This is about coming together. Now, Saudi Arabia, the GCC, obviously have a huge stake in this. They've lost tens of trillions of dollars that they put into remaking their economies to make it more livable, a place to do business, and for tourism. And now that is definitely on the back burner for quite some time until there is a resolution of this. Now, when you go to Europe should be acting as well, but I don't have faith in them the way that I would have in India. They do have some reserves. They're rich. Maybe they think they can ride this out, or they can find other energy things because they can buy it. But they're not acting responsibly, but they do have huge risks in this in terms of the cost of energy. You go to South America, they are also in this game. It's not a question of that they win because resources become more expensive. ASEAN also in the mix. These are all areas that need to come together to show some sort of unity, not creating another UN, but coming together and telling two actors that they have to start acting responsibly on the global stage, that they cannot put their narrow interests and their ideologies against each other at the expense of the world.
Mr. Tangen, you're naming so many countries, and I'm wondering, will Donald Trump listen to any of them?
He will not listen to any one country, but he will listen to all of them. He has a penchant for doing taco. Trump always chickens out, and he's a bully. What do bullies respect? Greater power than themselves. I assure you, if the world comes to his door as a group and says, knock it off, put what you do with your tariffs on your own country, they can be uniform, but you're not going to pit the rest of the world against each other, trying to win your favor, right? That is out of the question. You do what you want with your country. Let your voters decide what they want to do with you. But the world has to go on. It's interwoven. You cannot stop and undo what has been done. And if you do, it's going to cost the world a tremendous amount of money. So it's not about countries or groups. It's about coming together.
The US president is flying to Beijing next week for a state visit. Do you think what you're talking about there could be a start in Beijing?
No, because that's just China. He's already said that he thinks that China instigated this, but this is to a certain extent self-serving. That this is, oh, I'm going to go see my buddy in Beijing, and this is nonsense. No one is his buddy. I mean, he is the source of most of the consternation that is going on in the world today. He's somebody in a position of power. You have to engage with him because you don't know what he's going to do if he's not engaged. And that's what China's doing. But this idea that they're friends or that somehow he can cajole Xi Jinping into going along with whatever cockamamie idea that he has, or that somehow China's going to help resolve the situation he got him into. No, this is not about helping the United States. It's about helping the world. You look at the three initiatives that China's talked about: security, development, and respect for sovereignty, and having a global governance system. I think this is what people should be focusing on. This is the time to show the world that collectively, the global South that was victimized by colonization for the last 500 years, it is time to put that aside and to act together so that we are not trampled on once again.
Yes, but speaking of that togetherness, don't you think that given that Trump has only spoken about a very few handful of people with respect, someone who actually respects, and he speaks of the Chinese president like that, and maybe the Chinese president can use that leverage in talking him out of this war, that the war needs to end, the entire world is suffering because of it.
Yes, but the question you're asking me assumes that somebody else should do something. You haven't not once mentioned that it's a duty of all countries, including India. Trump has tremendous respect for Putin. Do you think Putin is supposed to go to Washington and tell him how to end this war? When you need something, when you want something, you have to act. You can't expect others to do it for you. India has started the non-aligned movement. What was that about? Not being run over by other powers, but acting collectively for the good of those who do not want to be trampled by these geopolitical giants moving around, completely regardless of the effect that it has on the rest of the world. You put the rest of the world together, you're talking about 4.5% of the world is the United States, right? That leaves over 95% for the rest of the world. Donald Trump will listen. But if it's only 10, 20%, no, he won't. Right? He only listens to power. The reason he respects Xi and Putin is because they have power. He used to respect Modi, but for some reason, he's given that up. And I think that's a mistake. So this is a situation where, as I said, if you want to be counted as a great leader in this situation, you need to step up.
Mr. Tangen, Iran's ambassador called at a news conference in Beijing for China to provide security guarantees for his country. Do you think Beijing would be open to something like that?
No. And the reason I say that is it could be part of a collective system, e.g. the UN or some body that has been formalized to do that. But China has not and will not enter into collective security agreements or things. They see the specter of World War I, when everybody thought that the way to prevent war was to create alliances. And in essence, what it did is set off a chain reaction that resulted in World War I. So China learns from history. This is the difference between civilization states like India and China, etc. They try to learn from the past as opposed to repeating it. And right now, the United States is repeating all of the mistakes of the past in very quick succession.
All right. Iran is also in a position now, rather it has been put in a position where it is bound to have trust issues with other countries. It already had trust issues with the West. Now its neighbors in the Gulf have also come under attack. Do you think Iran completely trusts China at the moment?
I don't think Iran trusts anybody at this moment. They have a higher trust level, perhaps in Russia and China. But it's a situation where the world has stood by for these many years while Iran was sanctioned. Very few countries did anything. China traded with them. Obviously, Russia traded with them to a degree. They are looking to those countries that they have had relations with. But it's not all smooth sailing. Iran has their own ideas about what they want to happen. They have definitely frictions with their neighbors. Things were looking up. China negotiated this détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but right now that's out the window. The question is, until we figure out, and I say globally, how to get 20% of the world's energy out of that bottleneck and create a stable peace. Stop looking for somebody to save you. We have to save ourselves.
Do you expect this war to change the relationship or evolve the relationship between Iran and China in any way?
No, I don't really. I mean, the relations were good. China is not going to extend more to it. I mean, it's a trading relationship. They have 140 primary trade relationships with countries around the world. They do it based on trade, not on trying to project their power into other areas, telling them, ideologically, you should do this or that. Along with India and many other countries, they're part of the AIIB. They're part of the New Development Bank, and these are banks that are lending based on projects. Right? It's not about projecting. It doesn't tell countries how they should run themselves, like the World Bank and the IMF. So we have to set aside some of the preconditions that we had about what leadership means, because we've been thinking that it was all based on what the Europeans and the US have done. Those were empires. They built their empires by taking from other countries. India knows that best of all. Started off with 24% of the world's GDP, and when the British left, you had literally 4%. So it's time to reverse that, and it doesn't happen because you ask. It is because you act.
Mr. Tangen, every country has red lines when it comes to their foreign policy. Unlike Pakistan and Sri Lanka, Iran, at least till now, had not accepted any extensive loans from China. Do you see that as a possibility after the war, given Iran's financial situation, which was already dire pre-war, is only getting worse?
Well, you'll notice that with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is about $1.3 trillion, that has gone out investments outside. There has been a recalibration. Initially, loans between China were between government to government. Fortunately, when governments change, the new government coming in would cry that these loans were subject to corruption, or they weren't the right thing, or that trap diplomacy. So China has switched over to a project-based lending. So if the project pencils out, they will lend. And no one knows that better than India, which has gotten the majority of loans from both the New Development Bank and is also the largest recipient of loans from the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So these are, how to promote projects, making sure that they're viable. This is the project. This is the path forward. And I don't see China changing that.
All right. Before I wrap up, Mr. Tangen, other countries, apart from the one in West Asia, when they look at the war right now, and when I say other countries, I mean the typical adversaries of United States. China is often named one. Russia is named another, even though the current president is changing that kind of a dynamics where he calls his friends foe and foe friends. How do you think these countries, including North Korea, are looking at this, or what do you think is their takeaway?
I don't know what's in North Korea's mind, and if you knew, I would be very interested to know. I mean, he is Kim is his own person. Obviously, he feels validated because North Korea is under sanctions, and they feel that the global order is pushing towards their sphere in terms of being independent. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but it's not my position to do so. I can say clearly that China is not an adversary of the United States. It's the United States that likes to name adversaries. I dare you to find any document where they say the U.S. is an adversary, because it doesn't exist, at least coming from the Chinese government. Even Russia doesn't do it. It's the United States, when they just before the beginning of the war, they named two actors in terms of Cuba. Who were they? China and Russia. What's significant? This is the first time, even during the Cold War, there was no specific calling out of a country as an adversary. It's the U.S. and it's the first time in this the U.S. who has innumerable white papers in defense saying that China is the adversary, numerous economic papers that say that. It's the United States that has this idea that everybody is against it, that it's the victim. The richest, most powerful country on earth is, of course, the victim of all of these years.
All right, Mr. Tangen, thank you so much for sitting down with me and having this wonderful conversation. Pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you. All the best to you.